Well, this is the weekend edition of Good Morning Scotland with Lucy White and Fiona Stalker. Good to have you with us. Lots to get through this morning, but the story that's dominating the websites and the papers this morning and much of social media, Match of the Day, will air later without a studio presenter, pundits or its regular commentators after the BBC told Gary Lineker to step back in a row over impartiality. Pundits Ian Wright, Alan Shearer, Micah Richards and Jermaine Jenis have all said they will not appear on the show. Alex Scott hinted the same, while 6 members of the MOTD commentating team said they'd also not take part. The BBC said it considered his recent social media activity to be a breach of our guidelines. Keen to know what you think about this story. You can text us on 80295 or tweet at BBC Radio Scott using the hashtag BBCGMS. But at the moment, I'm joined by John Nicholson, the SNP MP, who sits on the House of Commons Digital, Culture, Media and Sports Committee and himself was a former broadcaster. Good morning to you. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning. Thank you for asking me.
And what do you make of all of this, Mr Nicholson?
I think it's very disturbing. I think it shows undue influence by the Conservative Party at the top of the BBC. We have to remember that the Director General of the BBC, he's the high headman of the whole BBC, is a former Conservative Party candidate. And very disturbingly, the chair of the BBC is a huge Conservative Party donor who facilitated an £800,000 loan to Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson then gave him the job of BBC chair, and he withheld this from the panel when he applied for his job. And my committee, a cross-party committee, have just produced an excoriating report about this.
Yeah, and Mr Sharp did say, sorry John, just to interrupt there, Mr Sharp has told BBC staff that he believes he was appointed on merits. The Cabinet Office has confirmed that, and his personal interests would be reviewed by the BBC's Board's Nominations Committee when it meets. He's also committed to having the findings of the review published in the interest of transparency. But Mr Nicholson, this is about impartiality though, isn't it?
I'm sorry, let me respond to that. Well, obviously, he's no choice about it. It's not his decision over whether it's published. It will be published. But it's important to remember that the House of Commons Culture Committee, cross-party, produced an excoriating report. Yeah. He withheld the information.
OK, back to Gary Lineker, though, Mr Nicholson. Can we talk about Gary Lineker?
I'm happy to talk about Gary Lineker. My point, of course, is the context of it, which is the Conservative Party now, I believe, plays far too significant a role at the top of the BBC. Now, Gary Lineker is not a political correspondent. He's not a news presenter like you or like I was. He is a sports presenter and he is a freelancer. It is quite wrong to say that Gary Lineker should not be able to express his opinions in the way that he's done, because
why?
He's not BBC staff.
But he is the face of the BBC.
He's not BBC staff and he's not a news presenter. And the BBC has many presenters out with news and sadly at least one within news who have expressed strong political views in the past and have not been censured for this. The BBC management, I'm afraid, tends to get over-agitated when it's somebody expressing opinions from the centre or from the left or is critical of the Conservative government.
But he is the face of the BBC, and the BBC has said it's his social media activity, and it's not the first time that there's been issues, breached BBC guidelines.
Well, the BBC guidelines, which I'm sure you're familiar with, as am I, are far from clear about the role of freelancers who work out with the news. Gary Lineker is entitled to express his opinion, and this is part of an ongoing process in which I think right-wing figures parachuted into the BBC are exerting undue influence. We've already seen, have we not, Newsnight staff being lectured about impartiality by a former Tory spin doctor who sits on the BBC board.
What's the proof? Sorry, what's the proof for that? The decisions on Newsnight are made by Newsnight editors. Each programme has its own editor, Mr Nicholson. You do know this.
I worked in Newsnight for many years.
But let's get back to Gary Lineker. He's a sports...
Again, you asked me what the proof of that is.
Yes.
I worked on Newsnight for many, many years. When I worked in Newsnight, it would have been absolutely impossible to imagine a party political spin doctor who then sits on the BBC board turning up into my office at Newsnight and lecturing us about impartiality. It would have been considered presumptuous.